Welcome to Point Taken with Kristen and Steve. When I had president of the Wisconsin Super Law and Liberty, Rick Essenberg, on the show a couple of weeks ago while Kristen was off, working on all the things she works on when she's not doing our show, I said to him, hey, when's Will Flanders coming on the show? He's the smartest guy you have working there. And he sort of nodded and, so joining us in the studio is...
Did he not appreciate that? Does Rick think he's the smartest person working at Will?
Yeah, we got to downgrade me a little bit on the
Did
list
you have
there,
like an inter-office debate? Was that going around the emails? No, Will Flanders, doctor at... what is your doctorate in?
Political science and public policy. So
nice.
only tangentially related to the work that I do.
That's still impressive. And I've had Will on the show for years, my show and other shows. So you guys always do some interesting work, and one of the things you've done recently is a documentary on why teachers leave in the state of Wisconsin. And as someone who's married to a teacher, she's got thoughts. I shared the clip with her, and she has different thoughts than you have. But so give us. I'll tell you what she said in a second, but give us your takeaways from what you gleaned, your company, your organization, what they gleaned from talking to teachers.
Yeah, absolutely. So, we know about the teacher shortage. We know about the problem of teacher retention, teachers leaving the workforce after not very long in the field. And this creates problems for districts around the state as well as for schools across all sectors, right? So what we wanted to do was to talk to teachers on the ground and, get their sort of firsthand perspective as to what they see as the issues in the classroom. And what we saw as to why teachers are leaving is one of the primary drivers is the problem of student discipline, the problem of student misbehavior in the classroom, and oftentimes that misbehavior not being rectified by administration. And there's some data to back that up nationally, right? There's a national survey from the NEA, so not some right-wing leaning organization at all. Recently, that said 80% of teachers see student behavior as a major problem. 44% of teachers said that's a major stressor, one of their biggest issues in the classroom. So that was backed up by some of what we saw in the interviews.
So when we say behavior, let's get more specific. Like, what are we talking about?
Yeah, so it can be a wide variety of things, right? But I think some of the main things are just classroom disruption. You can get into the more serious things, like we had some teachers talk about actually facing violence in the classroom. But the day-to-day thing that I think wears teachers down the most many times is that students are just misbehaving, talking out of turn, insulting each other, not listening to the lessons. And so that's probably the number one thing. Obviously, you get to more extreme things like violent behavior and things like that. That's on the margins, but when those things happen, obviously that's a maybe even bigger impetus towards leaving the classroom.
Get my mic on. One of the biggest testimonials that I gleaned from watching this was when a teacher said to me, one of the biggest things we just can't stand is when we remove a student for disciplinary reasons and they're set right back. Because it shows that other students that the student one, that they're weak teachers, they don't have any control over their classroom. And that message, talking to my wife, she's had that happen to her in her career, where you don't look very good when they just send them right back to the very problem they created.
Absolutely. There's two problems there. One is that the student obviously doesn't face any sort of disincentive for the misbehavior, right? Oftentimes they'll be sent back with a candy or some sort of almost a reward for the behavior the behavior issues they've had. And secondly, it decreases the respect that the teacher has as an authority figure in the classroom. So not only does that student no longer necessarily feel the need to follow what the teacher says, but other kids in the classroom see that as well, and that can be a sort of driver towards further behavioral issues.
So is this something that we know over time has gotten worse? Because I know so often when we talked about coming out of COVID, like the antisocial behavior of both adults and students, sure, right? Like a lot of us forgot how to act during that time. And so is this something that we've seen a rise in worse behavior in kids, or the documentary that you guys did, is it mostly just getting testimony from teachers and basing it off of that?
So I think post-COVID, we certainly have seen an uptick, and it's probably more anecdotal than what we can show data-wise that there's been an uptick in behavioral issues. But you're absolutely right. Kids that spent a year and a half at home didn't necessarily get socialized into the normal behavior in a classroom, and we have a generation of kids that missed out on that socialization period. So certainly seems to be an uptick post-COVID, though really you can trace this back a decade or more to where we've really been disincentivizing some of the stronger discipline practices that we used to see in schools, like utilizations of in-school suspensions, utilization of out-of-school suspensions, and any sort of harsher punishment. We've really sort of incentivized from the top down, from the federal government to the local governments and administrators within schools, disincentivized using some of those methods in general.
So if suspensions are down, and I think I've heard this before, right? Like different, I don't know, and I don't know how many in Wisconsin actually use this, but like meditation and yoga and trying to find like almost a social reform aspect to discipline. And again, I don't know how much that's utilized in Wisconsin, but is that what we're talking about as far as just like thinking that suspensions don't serve the child and so finding other ways and it's not working?
Yeah, I think that's a big part of it. So one of the big things across the state you'll see in school districts was the implementation of what's known as positive behavioral supports. And the notion there is that we try to be more rehabilitative, like sort of some of the things we've seen, in prisons and jails as well over the years.
The description I heard from a school board member was keep them in the classroom.
Exactly, and that is the overall goal. And there are positives to that, right? The first goal should be to keep students in the classroom when possible, but we also need to think about the sort of classroom environment as a whole. And oftentimes when we focus on the one kid, we're costing educational opportunities for the other 20 or 25 kids in the classroom by keeping that student in the classroom.
You can't teach when you have a disruption that's affecting all of the other students.
Absolutely.
And my wife's answer on this question, besides the behavior thing, which she certainly was aware of in her many years of teaching, was you ask a teacher or an ex-teacher and they'll tell you it's salary and benefits.
So that's what I was going to say. Is like, is this actually, I'm not saying it's not an issue. In the myriad of issues that teachers are facing, as far as I think a lot of them would say, since Act 10, the respect for the profession has changed. What the salary is, what the benefits are, what the stress load is, feeling actually supported. So there's guns, right? Like there's a different safety issue altogether with that. So is this one of many, or are you guys trying to make the argument that this is the main driver of teachers leaving the profession?
No, I think it's certainly one of many.
Okay.
I mean, some of the polling data that we've found, and there's a poll of MPS exit surveys, right, where the number one overall issue for teachers leaving the profession was personal safety, working conditions, lack of support and respect is part of that as well.
Yeah.
But all these things do sort of overlap. In terms of salary, I think we're very sympathetic to the needs to work on raising teacher salaries. One thing we like to point out is our average, per pupil spending in the state now is $18,592 per student. If you take that with a class of 20 students, you're at almost $300,000 of value. So, one thing to ask for teachers is, where is that money going if not into their pockets? Sometimes it's been to service with special needs services and things like that actually stem from a lot of the discipline issues that we're seeing. But there's a lot of money in our schools. It's just not always ending up with the teachers.
Dr. Will Flanders, Wisconsin Institute for Law and Liberty. We'll take a quick break here. Continue the conversation after this. Dr. Will Flanders, our guest from the Wisconsin Institute for Law and Liberty, talking about a documentary they've done on sort of keeping teachers around, with some of the reasoning why they are leaving. And there's a lot of opinions. One of the texters just said, you asked me about teacher salaries, I don't care. Basically, I'm paraphrasing. But I think we should care because they're teaching your kids, first off. Any profession that requires, and I think we still have this in place, a college degree probably should be higher compensated than the one that doesn't in most cases, right?
Well, just in also a stressful, hard job that is has big ramifications on the outcomes of kids.
Because one of the reasons I love the Wisconsin Institute for Law and Liberty and your fearless leader, Rick Essenberg, is that you don't just say stuff, you give us ideas on implementation of an action plan that could actually try to fix this. So let's hit on some of that.
Yeah, absolutely. So there was a bill that was known as the Teacher Bill of Rights the legislative session currently that the governor has unfortunately vetoed. His arguments were that we weren't doing enough for mental health, and this was an unfunded mandate. We can discuss some of those things as well. But I think, some of the solutions that were in that legislation maybe could be brought back individually. I think the first thing is, strengthening teachers' authority in the classroom. The bill would have required that teachers can remove violent or disruptive students and ensure they.
Why is that not the case?
Well, there are a lot of issues that come into play with that, right? But I think a lot of this is within the school. They have an incentive to keep the number of incidents down. That goes for suspensions and expulsions, but also just even behavior that they're notifying parents about and things of that nature.
Is it for legal reasons?
When you get into disability and things like that, then it's for legal reasons. Beyond that, it's sort of just for,
appearance sake.
Appearance sake is a big driver at that point, I think. Yeah. But also, you think about parents, and we can't say parents are absolved of responsibility as well. No one likes to hear their kid is misbehaving. No one likes to think their kid's being singled out for misbehavior. So that's a driver as well.
Although I would argue
that's the meme, right? As far as like when I was a kid, the parents looking at the kids being like, "Why'd you get a B?" And now it's the parents looking at the teachers being like, "Why did she get a B?"
Yes, perfectly stated. Yes, exactly right. That's the new reality, and I hate it. I absolutely hate that. Parents, if you want better schools, support the teachers, support the school district. If you fight with them constantly and just take your kid's side, you think you're being a great parent, but you're actually hurting them, in my opinion.
Absolutely. And it's all context. We can talk about grade inflation, right? Part of that is driven by schools wanting to have high graduation rate, but part of it's driven by parents not wanting to see a C or D, as you just sort of stated there.
Or get their kid into the best school
possible.
Yeah.
Exactly. Some of the other things that we included there, that there should be a requirement for classroom reentry plans. So we just discussed in the previous segment, kids coming immediately back into the classroom. Certainly for profound or severe misbehavior, we ought to have a idea in place of how we're going to bring this kid back into the classroom rather than just sort of immediately doing it. And then letting parents be informed. We just talked about the parents may be on the wrong side, but parents also deserve to know what's going on in classroom. And sometimes there's not a requirement there as well. So those are three of the ideas we have currently.
So is there an idea that the Teacher Bill of Rights, because I think Louisiana has this, right? And they really teachers like it.
Yes.
And so as far as who brought forward the bill this last time, was it a teacher lobbied bill, or as far as getting more support for it if it were to be reintroduced in the next session? What more support do you think it would need to get through?
Yeah, so I think this is an area where we see sort of a wedge between teachers on the ground and the teachers union sometimes. There is a notion that some of the stuff isn't the most politically correct, right? That we are trying to enforce discipline, and we all like the notion of classrooms where we might have a kumbaya sort of environment, right? So teachers on the ground see the problems, but teachers unions sometimes have been oppositional in some aspects of this. We did have teachers individually that were willing to speak out and support, like you saw in the documentary there as well. So I think getting more teachers on board and explaining what the components of this legislation would be, or as I said, pairing them out and doing them individually as different pieces of legislation, I think that would be a key to building support, because we do want to know that this will actually help teachers on the ground in the classrooms be more effective.
Dr. Will Flanders, Wisconsin Institute for Law and Liberty, will throw some Will headlines at you, including food trucks. I didn't see that one coming.
I did not see that coming, but I'm here to talk about it.
Yeah, Mr. Smart Guy you're going to get all the questions from Wisconsin Institute for Law and Liberty. Point taken, 620 WTMJ. Quick break. All right, ripped from the headlines, this food truck lawsuit from your organization on behalf of the owner of the Fatty Patty food truck. It's sort of an interesting. You said you were surprised by this.
Well, it's not surprised so much as, I guess, let me put it a different way. I'm against the food trucks having to shut down. I think that's not an actual solution. I don't think it's going to get us to where we need to go. And I think it's wildly unfair to the food trucks. And I didn't know there was a legal argument to make as far as what standing they have to actually argue that this is illegal. And so I was a little surprised when Will decided to take this up, but here we are. Will's defending the right to make a living for these food trucks.
Absolutely. Obviously, it's maybe not in the comfort zone of our case, our typical cases too much. But I think when you look at a lot of the stuff we've done over the years, we do support economic freedom, right? We believe in the ability of people to make a living, as you say, and to do whatever job in whatever manner they see fit that doesn't violate anybody else's rights. So, I think this seemed like a perfect opportunity to sort of showcase that, certainly, and to get involved in an issue that, maybe a little outside of our comfort zone, but definitely is aligned with our general beliefs.
So will Evan Goyke have to be the one to defend this? Is that who you guys will be up against?
So I'd have to leave that one to the lawyers and see what's going to go there, but it may lead to some interesting mashups there.
One of the things that, first of all, I agree with Kristen. I think this is dumb to shut these businesses down, essentially, to try to fix something else. But people always ask me, why are you a supporter of Will? And I say I am. I have Rick on the show many times. I have you on the show and a lot of your other folks who work there. You cast a broad nets when you take on cases or you argue, and we're not all going to agree on this stuff. But that's a good thing. And it's a celebration of an organization, I think, stepping up for people. Some people you may not even like, but they generally pretty consistent on what they argue, whether it's political freedom or, in this case, economic freedom. And that's why I support Will.
Well, yeah, thank you for that. And I think that's certainly our aspiration, right, is to obviously we have a set of beliefs. We have, we have principles that we stick to. Oftentimes, those principles may align more with one side than the other, but sometimes there's crossover, and, we sort of stick to the principles wherever they lead us. Even if some folks on the left may not think that's always the case, we generally try to adhere to those principles wherever they take us.
All right, I have to call you out not call you out, because I actually think I agree with you. But
another one.
You tweeted out you not impressed with cursive mandates.
Yeah, so this is one where I will diverge even from some of our friends in the legislature in recent years. I try to be me personally, I try to look at the data, right? Because that's my role at Will, is to be the data person. And I'm not convinced by the research that's out there that there's a huge benefit to cursive writing versus just writing in general.
Give me the argument on that, because I'm a
writing
fan
over
of
typing,
it.
I think there is data,
Certainly,
right? Like
yeah.
actually putting pen to paper is different cognitively.
That's
but
right.
you're saying cursive versus print doesn't make a difference.
Exactly, and, and I haven't seen many studies that really parse that out. I'm usually, I'm happy to have my mind change if someone can show me convincing evidence.
Maybe someone's doctoral thesis could be on that.
That's true. There's an opportunity for someone out there.
Yeah, we just gave him some information. A quick story: when I was doing my grad school entrance forms, they have you write a paragraph or two in cursive. I had to think long and hard how that looked, because I print everything. That was like a
surprised the nuns didn't force you to do cursive. Just
I did
beat
cursive,
that into your
but
little
I was
hand.
never a great cursive writer. I can't even read my own printing.
My cursive is limited to my signature. That's about all I've retained from my cursive.
All right, Dr. Will Flanders, always enjoy your visits. We were talking about some Brewers. He's a big Brewers fan, big baseball fan, smart guy. Thanks for coming in.
Thanks, guys. Thanks so much for having me on.